The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and life moved at a predictable pace. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a community that prided itself on its simplicity and charm. People here were friendly, often gathering for weekend barbecues or holiday parades. It was the sort of place where nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen, until Daniel Harper decided to dig up his mother's grave. The idea had come to him in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together over months. At first, it was just a nagging feeling, an uneasiness he couldn't quite explain. Then came the dreams, vivid, haunting visions that left him shaken every time he woke up. In these dreams, he saw his mother, Margaret Harper, calling out to him from inside her coffin. She wasn't dead. She was alive, trapped, pleading for help. Though Daniel tried to dismiss them as products of grief, they persisted, growing more intense with each passing night. Margaret Harper had passed away 5 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. Officially, her death was ruled natural causes due to a prolonged illness. But Daniel had always harbored doubts. His mother had been strong-willed and resilient, the kind of woman who rarely let anything get the better of her. Yet, in the months leading up to her death, she had seemed different, distant, almost secretive. She spent long hours on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, and often avoided answering questions about her health. When she finally succumbed to what doctors described as heart failure, Daniel accepted it because there was no reason not to. However, deep down, something felt off, though he couldn't put his finger on it. Over the years, those feelings had simmered beneath the surface, occasionally bubbling up when he least expected them. Now, the dreams had forced him to confront them head-on. One chilly autumn morning, Daniel stood outside the gates of Willow Creek Cemetery, staring at the rows of tombstones stretching across the hillside. He clutched a piece of paper in his hand, a permit he'd obtained after much persuasion from Mr. Grayson, the cemetery caretaker. Mr. Grayson was a gruff man in his 60s with weathered hands and a face lined with years of hard work. When Daniel approached him with his unusual request, Mr. Grayson had been skeptical. "You sure about this, son?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Once you open that grave, there's no going back." Daniel nodded firmly, his resolve unwavering. He didn't care what others thought. He needed answers. Mr. Grayson eventually relented, warning Daniel that disturbing a grave was no small matter and advising him to prepare himself for whatever he might find. With permission secured, Daniel hired 2 local laborers to assist with the excavation. They arrived early the next day, their shovels glinting in the pale morning light. As they began digging, Daniel paced nervously nearby, his breath visible in the cold air. The rhythmic sound of shovels hitting dirt filled the silence, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. The workers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the task at hand. Digging up a grave wasn't something people did lightly, especially in a town like Willow Creek where traditions were deeply respected. Yet, they continued, driven by a mix of curiosity and the promise of payment. For Daniel, the wait was agonizing. Each scoop of earth felt like an eternity, and the weight of anticipation pressed heavily on his chest. He couldn't shake the image of his mother's face from his mind, the way she used to smile, the warmth in her eyes. What if he was wrong? What if opening the coffin revealed nothing but decay and disappointment? Finally, after hours of painstaking work, the workers reached the coffin. It lay buried several feet below the surface, encased in damp soil that smelled faintly of earth and decay. Daniel knelt beside the rectangular outline, his heart pounding wildly. He hesitated before giving the signal to pry it open, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the lid. The moment of truth had arrived. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the lid upward, bracing himself for what he might see. And then, as the coffin creaked open, his world tilted on its axis. Inside was not his mother. Instead, he found the skeletal remains of a stranger, a woman whose features bore no resemblance to Margaret Harper. Her clothes were unfamiliar, mismatched with the elegant dress Daniel remembered dressing his mother in. A wave of nausea washed over him as reality crashed down like a tidal wave. This wasn't his mother's body. Someone else had been buried, in her place. Daniel staggered backward, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? How had she ended up in his mother's grave? And most importantly, where was Margaret? The implications of what he had uncovered were staggering. If this wasn't his mother, then everything he thought he knew about her death was a lie. Panic surged through him as he realized the enormity of the situation. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he explained what he had found. Within minutes, police cars screeched into the cemetery, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the landscape. Detective Laura Bennett, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, took charge of the scene. She listened intently as Daniel recounted the events leading up to the discovery, her expression unreadable. Officers cordoned off the area while forensic experts carefully examined the coffin and its contents. The atmosphere was tense, charged, with a mix of disbelief and urgency. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Bennett began piecing together the puzzle. Interviews with neighbors revealed that Margaret Harper had been embroiled in a bitter feud with Victor Langston, a wealthy landowner who owned property on the outskirts of town. According to rumors, Victor had accused Margaret of stealing valuable family heirlooms, though no concrete evidence had ever surfaced to support his claims. Further digging into hospital records raised even more questions. Some entries suggested that Margaret might have faked her illness, using forged documents to create the illusion of declining health. Financial records painted an even murkier picture. Shortly before her supposed death, Margaret had withdrawn a substantial amount of money from her bank account, leaving behind little explanation for the transaction. It appeared that she had meticulously planned her disappearance, staging her own death to escape trouble. But why go to such lengths? And who was the woman buried in her place? Detective Bennett's focus shifted to Victor Langston, whose alibi for the time of Margaret's alleged death was shaky at best. During their meeting, Victor initially denied any involvement, but eventually cracked under pressure. He admitted to hiring someone to intimidate Margaret into returning the stolen items, or so he claimed, but insisted he never intended for things to escalate. Victor mentioned a name, Carla Dixon, a drifter who occasionally worked odd jobs around town. Records showed Carla had vanished around the same time Margaret supposedly died. Putting the pieces together, Detective Bennett theorized that Carla might have been coerced or tricked into participating in the scheme, only to end up as collateral damage. If true, this meant Margaret had orchestrated everything, using Carla's death to fake her own demise. For Daniel, the revelation was both shocking and devastating. The mother he had loved and mourned was still alive, living under an assumed identity far away from Willow Creek, while relieved to know she hadn't truly died. Daniel struggled to reconcile the image of the caring woman he grew up with and the calculating figure emerging from the shadows. The truth had come at a cost, unraveling the fabric of his trust. Yet amidst the turmoil, there was hope. Margaret promised to make amends, and Daniel vowed to rebuild their relationship, one step at a time. Life in Willow Creek would never be the same again, but sometimes closure, even painful, is exactly what people need to move forward. Detective Laura Bennett was no stranger to complicated cases, but this one felt different. The discovery of an unidentified body in Margaret Harper's grave had turned the quiet town of Willow Creek upside down. As she stood beside the open coffin, her sharp eyes scanned every detail: the unfamiliar clothing, the skeletal remains, and the faint traces of soil that clung to the edges of the casket. Something about the scene didn't add up. For one, the woman inside couldn't have been buried for 5 years. The condition of the remains suggested a shorter time frame. Forensic experts confirmed her suspicions. Based on decomposition patterns, the body was likely interred within the past 2 years. This meant someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, replacing Margaret Harper with another victim entirely. The question was, who and why? Daniel Harper sat on a nearby bench, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man caught in a storm. unable to find shelter. Detective Bennett approached him cautiously, sensing the weight of his emotions. "Mr. Harper," she began gently, "I need you to think back. Was there anyone in your mother's life who might have wanted to harm her, or anyone she confided in before her death?" Daniel hesitated, his mind racing through memories. His mother had always been private, rarely sharing personal details even with him. But now, as he sifted through fragments of conversations and fleeting moments, he remembered something peculiar. In the weeks leading up to her supposed death, Margaret had spoken cryptically about needing to disappear. At the time, Daniel had dismissed it as stress or fatigue, but now those words took on a sinister tone. Could she have planned her own disappearance all along? If so, what had driven her to such extremes? While Daniel wrestled with these thoughts, Detective Bennett dug deeper into Margaret's past. Her investigation led her to Victor Langston, a wealthy landowner whose name kept cropping up during interviews with neighbors. Victor had a reputation for being ruthless when crossed, and his feud with Margaret over stolen heirlooms was well known in Willow Creek. Some claimed the argument had escalated into threats, though nothing concrete had ever been proven. When Detective Bennett paid Victor a visit, she found him seated in his sprawling living room surrounded by expensive furniture and portraits of his ancestors. His demeanor was calm, almost too composed as he recounted his side of the story. Yes, he admitted he'd accused Margaret of theft, but only because he believed she was responsible for the disappearance of valuable family artifacts. No, he insisted, he hadn't harmed her, though he did admit to hiring someone to scare her straight. That someone, he revealed, was Carla Dixon. Carla Dixon was a drifter, a woman who drifted in and out of towns taking odd jobs to get by. She had no family, few friends, and even fewer ties to Willow Creek. According to Victor, he had paid Carla to confront Margaret, hoping to intimidate her into returning the stolen items. But when Carla vanished shortly after, Victor assumed she had simply moved on, leaving the matter unresolved. Detective Bennett wasn't convinced. Carla's sudden disappearance coincided with Margaret's alleged death, making her a person of interest, or possibly a victim. Records showed Carla had last been seen in Willow Creek around the same time Margaret supposedly passed away. Digging further, forensic experts identified the remains in the coffin as belonging to Carla Dixon. It was a grim confirmation. Carla had been murdered and buried in Margaret's place. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to stage Margaret's death, using Carla's body as a decoy. The revelation sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Residents whispered among themselves, speculating about what could have driven Margaret Harper to commit such an act. For Daniel, the news was devastating. The mother he had mourned for 5 years was not only alive but also involved in a web of deceit that included murder. Betrayal gnawed at him, mingling with confusion and anger. How could she do this to him, to Carla, to everyone who cared about her? Detective Bennett tried to reassure him that understanding Margaret's motives required patience. People often acted out of desperation, she explained, especially when they felt cornered. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he barely knew the woman he called mother. As the investigation progressed, Detective Bennett focused on tracking Margaret's movements since her disappearance. Financial records provided a crucial lead. Margaret had withdrawn a significant sum of money from her account shortly before her supposed death. The funds were transferred to various accounts under different names, suggesting she had planned her escape meticulously. Further analysis revealed recent activity linked to an address in Cedarville, a neighboring city known for its anonymity. With this information, authorities launched a search operation, combing through databases and surveillance footage. Days later, they located Margaret living under the alias Ellen Carter, running a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of Cedarville. When Detective Bennett arrived at the cafe, she found Margaret sitting at a table near the window sipping coffee and reading a book. She looked older than Daniel's photographs, her hair streaked with gray and lines etched into her face. Yet there was no mistaking her identity. Margaret froze when she saw the detective approaching, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation. Without resistance, she admitted to orchestrating the entire scheme. She described how Victor's accusations had pushed her to the brink, forcing her to make a choice between confronting him or disappearing altogether. Fearing retaliation, she chose the latter. Using connections she had made over the years, she arranged for Carla Dixon to be lured into the plan, promising her a large sum of money in exchange for posing as Margaret. What happened next, however, spiraled out of control. Carla, already vulnerable due to her transient lifestyle, became an unwilling pawn in Margaret's game. Whether Carla died accidentally or was deliberately silenced remained unclear, but Margaret accepted responsibility for the consequences of her actions. For Daniel, learning the truth was both a relief and a burden. On one hand, knowing his mother was alive brought a sense of closure he hadn't expected. On the other hand, the knowledge of her involvement in Carla's death left him grappling with conflicting emotions. He visited her briefly in custody, staring at her through the glass partition that separated them. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by guilt and regret. They spoke little, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Eventually, Daniel broke it, asking the one question that had haunted him since the beginning. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth?" Margaret lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. "Because I didn't want you to hate me," she whispered. "I thought this was the only way." In the weeks that followed, Margaret was charged with multiple crimes including fraud and accessory to manslaughter. Carla Dixon's body was exhumed and given a proper burial, her memory honored by a community that had failed to protect her. For Daniel, rebuilding his relationship with his mother would take time, and perhaps forgiveness he wasn't ready to give. Yet amidst the pain and betrayal, he clung to hope. Life in Willow Creek had changed forever. But sometimes change, even painful, was necessary for growth. As winter gave way to spring, the town began healing. Its people reminded once again of the complexities of human nature and the fragile threads that bind us together. The trial of Margaret Harper became the talk of Willow Creek, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even national media outlets. It was a spectacle no one could have anticipated in such a quiet community. Every day, the courthouse buzzed, with activity as reporters jotted down notes. Cameras clicked incessantly and residents gathered outside to catch glimpses of Margaret being escorted in and out of the building. For Daniel Harper, attending the proceedings felt like stepping into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He sat in the back row of the courtroom, his hands clasped tightly together, trying to process the details unfolding before him. The prosecution painted Margaret as a cold, calculating woman who had manipulated those around her for personal gain. They argued that her actions, not only faking her death but also involving Carla Dixon in her scheme, were premeditated and selfish. The defense, meanwhile, portrayed her as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to desperation by relentless harassment from Victor Langston and fear for her safety. Margaret herself remained composed throughout most of the trial, though there were moments when her facade cracked. When Carla Dixon's family took the stand, their grief palpable, she visibly flinched. A young woman, Carla's niece, spoke through tears about how much her aunt had meant to her and how her disappearance had left a void in their lives. "She didn't deserve this," the niece said, her voice trembling with anger. "No one deserves to be used like that." Margaret bowed her head, unable to meet the girl's gaze. Later, during her own testimony, Margaret admitted to orchestrating the plan but insisted she hadn't intended for Carla to die. She described feeling trapped, cornered by Victor's accusations and threats, and claimed she saw no other way out. Her words carried a tone of regret, but they did little to sway public opinion. To many, she was still the mastermind behind a cruel deception that had cost an innocent woman her life. As the trial dragged on, tensions in Willow Creek reached a boiling point. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, debating whether Margaret deserved leniency or punishment. Some sympathized with her, believing she had acted out of fear rather than malice. Others condemned her outright, arguing that her choices had shattered lives and betrayed trust. Even Detective Laura Bennett found herself conflicted. On one hand, she admired Margaret's resourcefulness and determination to escape what seemed like an impossible situation. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the consequences of her actions, the pain inflicted on Carla's family, the lies told to Daniel, and the chaos unleashed upon the town. In private moments, Laura wondered if justice would truly bring closure to anyone involved. For Daniel, the hardest part wasn't the trial itself, but the realization that his mother might never fully understand the depth of the hurt she had caused. After the verdict, a guilty sentence with a recommendation for psychological evaluation, Daniel visited Margaret one last time in jail. She looked frail, her once commanding presence diminished by the weight of her crimes. Sitting across from her in the visiting room, Daniel struggled to find the right words. "Do you know why I dug up your grave?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Because I thought I heard you calling me," he continued. "I thought you were still alive, trapped somewhere, needing help. And now?" His voice broke and he paused to steady himself. "Now I realize you were alive all along, but you weren't the person I thought you were." Margaret reached out, her hands trembling as she touched the glass partition separating them. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said softly. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if you believed I was gone, you'd move on, live your life without looking back. I never meant to hurt you." But Daniel shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "You didn't just lie to me, Mom. You made me grieve for someone who wasn't even dead. You let me bury another woman in your place. How am I supposed to forgive that?" Margaret had no answer, only silence heavy with regret. As the guard signaled the end of the visit, Daniel stood up, his heart aching. "Maybe someday we can try to fix this," he said quietly. "But not today. Not yet." In the aftermath of the trial, Willow Creek began the slow process of healing. Carla Dixon's family organized a memorial service, inviting the entire town to pay their respects. Dozens attended, laying flowers at the site where Carla was reburied. Her niece gave a heartfelt speech, urging everyone to remember her aunt, not as a victim but as a kind and generous soul who had been failed by those around her. The event marked a turning point for the community, a collective acknowledgement of the tragedy that had unfolded, and a commitment to prevent similar injustices in the future. Meanwhile, Victor Langston faced scrutiny for his role in the events leading up to Carla's death. Though he avoided criminal charges, his reputation suffered irreparably. Many residents distanced themselves from him, viewing him as complicit in the chain of events that ended in tragedy. Detective Laura Bennett reflected on the case long after it concluded. It had tested her skills, challenged her assumptions, and forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. People weren't always good or evil. Sometimes they were both, capable of love and betrayal, kindness and cruelty. Laura hoped the lessons learned from Margaret's story would resonate beyond Willow Creek, reminding others of the importance of accountability and compassion. For Daniel, moving forward meant finding a balance between anger and forgiveness. He threw himself into work, volunteering at local shelters and mentoring troubled youth. Helping others gave him purpose, a way to channel his emotions into something positive. Still, thoughts of his mother lingered, haunting him like shadows in the corners of his mind. He visited her occasionally, each meeting awkward yet necessary, as they tentatively worked to rebuild their fractured relationship. Years passed and life in Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm. The cemetery where Carla Dixon had been buried became a place of reflection, its serene beauty offering solace to those seeking peace. Daniel often went there, sitting quietly among the tombstones, thinking about the past and the choices that had shaped his present. One day, as he traced the engraved letters of Carla's name, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting go of the bitterness that weighed you down. He didn't know if he would ever fully forgive his mother, but he understood now that holding on to anger wouldn't change what had happened. Instead, he chose to focus on the future, determined to honor Carla's memory by living a life rooted in honesty and integrity. And so, Willow Creek moved on, carrying the scars of its history while embracing the promise of tomorrow. The story of Margaret Harper served as a reminder that truth, however painful, was essential for healing. It taught the town that people were complex, capable of great harm and great redemption. Most importantly, it underscored the power of resilience, the ability to rise above adversity and find hope even in the darkest of times. As Daniel walked away from the cemetery that day, he felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, he and the people of Willow Creek would continue to heal, one step at a time. The years following Margaret Harper's conviction brought significant changes to Willow Creek, reshaping the town in ways both subtle and profound. For Daniel Harper, life took on a new rhythm as he navigated the complexities of forgiveness, grief, and rebuilding trust. Though his mother remained incarcerated, serving her sentence in a correctional facility far from home, their relationship continued to evolve through sporadic visits and letters. Each interaction was fraught with tension but also tinged with hope. Margaret wrote often, her words filled with remorse and longing for reconciliation. In one letter, she described how prison had given her time to reflect on her choices, forcing her to confront the person she had become. "I see now that I thought I was protecting you," she wrote, "but instead, I caused more pain than I ever imagined." Daniel read these letters carefully, folding them neatly and tucking them away in a drawer. He didn't respond immediately. Sometimes weeks or months passed before he could bring himself to write back. But when he did, his replies were honest, raw, and unfiltered. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Margaret's actions continued to reverberate throughout the community. Carla Dixon's family, though still grieving, found solace in knowing that justice had been served. They established a scholarship fund in Carla's name, aimed at supporting women who faced difficult circumstances and needed financial assistance to pursue education or training programs. The initiative quickly gained traction, drawing support from across Willow Creek and beyond. It became a symbol of renewal, transforming tragedy into an opportunity to uplift others. For Daniel, participating in the scholarship committee provided a sense of purpose. He threw himself into organizing fundraisers, speaking at events, and connecting with donors, channeling his energy into something meaningful. Over time, he came to view this work not just as a tribute to Carla, but also as a way to honor his own journey toward healing. Detective Laura Bennett kept tabs on the case long after its conclusion, occasionally visiting Carla's gravesite to pay her respects. She saw it as a reminder of the fragility of human lives and the importance of seeking truth, no matter how painful. Her involvement in the investigation had left an indelible mark on her, shaping the way she approached future cases. She became known for her empathy and dedication, qualities that earned her respect within the department and among residents. Yet, even she couldn't escape the lingering questions about what might have been done differently to prevent Carla's death. Had the system failed Carla? Could someone have intervened sooner? These thoughts haunted her during quiet moments, prompting her to advocate for better resources and support networks for vulnerable individuals like Carla. Victor Langston, once a prominent figure in Willow Creek, faded into obscurity. His reputation never recovered from the scandal, and many avoided him altogether, viewing him as a catalyst for the chain of events that led to Carla's murder. Though he escaped criminal charges, the weight of public disdain forced him to sell off much of his property and retreat from social circles. Some whispered that karma had finally caught up with him, while others felt pity, recognizing that his arrogance and greed had blinded him to the consequences of his actions. Regardless of opinion, Victor's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and entitlement. As the town healed, its people began to embrace new beginnings. Businesses expanded, families grew, and friendships deepened. Yet beneath the surface, scars remained, reminders of the lessons learned. Conversations around accountability, compassion, and resilience became common, woven into the fabric of daily life. Parents taught their children about the importance of honesty and integrity, using Margaret's story as a real-life example of how deception could unravel lives. Teachers incorporated discussions about ethics and morality into their lesson plans, encouraging students to think critically about the impact of their decisions. Even local leaders took note, implementing initiatives to foster transparency and inclusivity within the community. For Daniel, finding closure proved to be a gradual process. He often visited the cemetery where Carla was buried, sitting quietly beside her grave and reflecting on the past. Sometimes he spoke aloud, sharing stories about his life since her death, or simply expressing gratitude for the lessons her memory had imparted. Other times he sat in silence, allowing the stillness to envelop him. On one such visit, he noticed a small bouquet of wildflowers placed near Carla's tombstone. Curious, he looked around and spotted a young woman standing nearby, her expression somber yet determined. She introduced herself as Emily, Carla's niece, the same girl who had spoken so passionately at the memorial service years earlier. They exchanged pleasantries, then fell into conversation, discussing their shared experiences of loss and healing. By the end of their talk, they agreed to stay in touch, forging a bond rooted in mutual understanding and respect. Over time, Daniel began opening up more about his feelings, sharing his struggles with close friends and colleagues. He realized that bottling up his emotions only prolonged the pain, whereas talking about them helped lighten the load. One evening, during a casual gathering at a friend's house, he recounted a particularly poignant moment from one of his visits with Margaret. "She told me she used to dream about running away when she was younger," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "She said it wasn't until Victor started accusing her that those dreams turned into plans. And now," he paused, searching for the right words, "now I understand why she did what she did, even if I can't agree with it." His admissions sparked a lively discussion about redemption and second chances, themes that resonated deeply with everyone present. Despite the progress he made, Daniel knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, or perhaps at all. But he accepted that forgiveness wasn't the ultimate goal. Peace was. Peace meant letting go of the anger and resentment that had consumed him for so long, replacing them with acceptance and hope. It meant acknowledging the complexity of human nature, the capacity for both good and evil, and choosing to focus on the positive. To that end, Daniel adopted a mantra: "What happened is part of my story, but it doesn't define me." He repeated it often, especially during moments of doubt or frustration, reminding himself that he had the power to shape his own narrative. By the 5th anniversary of Carla's proper burial, Willow Creek had transformed in remarkable ways. The scholarship fund had grown exponentially, providing opportunities for dozens of women to improve their lives. Community events celebrating kindness and unity drew large crowds, fostering a spirit of togetherness that transcended differences. And Daniel, though still grappling with his emotions, had found a measure of peace. Standing before Carla's grave on that crisp autumn morning, he placed a single rose atop the stone marker. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice steady and sincere, "for teaching me that even in darkness there's always light." In the distance, the sun peeked over the horizon, casting golden rays across the cemetery. Life in Willow Creek moved forward, carrying the weight of its history while embracing the promise of tomorrow. The scars would remain, but they no longer defined the town or its people. Instead, they served as reminders of resilience, proof that even the hardest trials could yield growth and transformation. As Daniel walked away, he felt lighter, freer, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the years rolled on, Willow Creek continued to evolve, its people finding strength in adversity and unity in shared experiences. The scars left by Margaret Harper's deception and Carla Dixon's tragic death remained etched into the town's collective memory, but they also became catalysts for growth and change. For Daniel Harper, the passage of time brought clarity and perspective. He had spent countless hours reflecting on his mother's actions, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the person she had become. Though forgiveness still eluded him, he no longer felt consumed by bitterness. Instead, he focused on channeling his emotions into something constructive, dedicating himself to causes that honored Carla's memory, while fostering healing within the community. One such cause was the annual Carla Dixon Day, a celebration organized by her family and supported by the Scholarship Fund. What began as a small gathering grew into a beloved tradition, drawing hundreds of residents each year. The event featured speeches, workshops, and performances centered around themes of resilience, kindness, and empowerment. Local businesses donated food and supplies, volunteers pitched in to organize activities, and families came together to honor Carla's legacy. For Daniel, participating in these events provided a sense of purpose. He often gave a brief speech, sharing his journey from grief to hope and encouraging others to find light even in their darkest moments. His words resonated deeply, inspiring many to confront their own struggles with courage and determination. Detective Laura Bennett, now nearing retirement, looked back on the case with a mix of pride and humility. It had been one of the most challenging investigations of her career, testing her skills and challenging her assumptions about human nature. Yet, it had also reinforced her belief in the importance of truth and justice. She often visited schools and community centers, speaking to young people about the value of integrity and accountability. Her talks were candid and heartfelt, filled with anecdotes from her years on the force. One story she frequently shared involved a pivotal moment during Margaret's trial, a moment when Carla's niece confronted her aunt's accusers with grace and poise. "That young woman showed me what true strength looks like," Laura would say, her voice tinged with admiration. "She reminded me that anger can be channeled into action, and pain can lead to purpose." Margaret Harper, meanwhile, remained incarcerated, serving out her sentence in relative obscurity. Over time, she became a quiet figure within the prison community, earning the respect of both inmates and staff through her willingness to mentor others and participate in rehabilitation programs. Letters between her and Daniel grew less frequent but no less meaningful. In one particularly poignant note, she expressed gratitude for his efforts to rebuild their relationship, acknowledging that she didn't deserve his forgiveness, but cherishing the connection they had managed to preserve. "You've taught me so much, Daniel," she wrote, "about love, patience, and the possibility of redemption. I only wish I could turn back time and do things differently." Daniel read the letter several times, folding it carefully before tucking it away. Though he still struggled with conflicting emotions, he found comfort in knowing that his mother was genuinely remorseful and working toward becoming a better person. Victor Langston's fall from grace served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked ambition and arrogance. Isolated and disgraced, he withdrew further from society, rarely venturing beyond the confines of his diminished estate. Some townsfolk speculated that he might have attempted to make amends if given the chance, but few were willing to extend him an olive branch. Instead, his story became a cautionary tale, whispered among neighbors as a warning against greed and manipulation. Even Detective Bennett, who prided herself on fairness, admitted that Victor's downfall was partly self-inflicted. "He thought he was untouchable," she once remarked during a casual conversation. "But life has a way of humbling even the proudest among us." In the absence of Victor's influence, Willow Creek flourished. New businesses opened, creating jobs and opportunities for residents. Community gardens sprouted up in vacant lots, providing fresh produce and fostering collaboration. Art installations adorned public spaces, transforming once neglected areas into vibrant hubs of creativity. These changes symbolized renewal, not just of the physical landscape, but also of the town spirit. People talked openly about their hopes and dreams, supporting one another in ways they hadn't before. Neighbors checked in on each other regularly, offering help without expecting anything in return. Acts of kindness, big and small, became commonplace, reinforcing the bonds that held the community together. For Daniel, this renewed sense of camaraderie offered solace. He threw himself into volunteer work, mentoring troubled youth and organizing outreach programs for at-risk individuals. Many of these initiatives stemmed from conversations he'd had with Carla's niece, Emily, who had grown into a passionate advocate for marginalized communities. Together, they launched a mentorship program aimed at empowering young women, pairing them with role models who could guide and inspire them. The program quickly gained traction, attracting participants from neighboring towns and garnering praise from local leaders. Watching these young women thrive gave Daniel a profound sense of fulfillment, reminding him that positive change was possible, even after unimaginable loss. Despite the progress he made, Daniel occasionally found himself revisiting old wounds. Late at night, when the world was quiet and his thoughts turned inward, he wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Could he ever fully forgive his mother? Did she truly regret her actions, or was she simply playing the part of a repentant inmate? And what about Carla? How could he honor her memory without letting guilt overshadow his life? These uncertainties lingered, unresolved, yet manageable. Over time, Daniel learned to live with them, viewing them not as burdens, but as reminders of his humanity. He realized that healing wasn't about erasing pain. It was about learning to carry it without letting it consume you. On the 10th anniversary of Carla's proper burial, Willow Creek held its largest celebration yet. Hundreds gathered at the park where the event took place, filling the air with laughter, music, and stories of triumph over adversity. Emily delivered a powerful speech, recounting how her aunt's memory had inspired her to fight for justice and equality. "Carla may be gone," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But her spirit lives on in all of us. Let's continue to honor her by lifting each other up and standing against injustice wherever we see it." The crowd erupted in applause, moved by her words and the collective progress they represented. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently as people embraced, cheered, and celebrated. He felt a swell of pride, not just for what the town had accomplished, but for how far he had come. Gone was the man who had dug up his mother's grave out of desperation and despair. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Daniel walked to Carla's grave one last time. Placing a bouquet of wildflowers atop the marker, he knelt and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Then, rising to his feet, he turned and walked away, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Willow Creek had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more united than ever. Its people carried the lessons of the past with them, using them as stepping stones toward a brighter future. Forgiveness, though elusive, remained a goal worth striving for. Resilience, born of hardship, became a cornerstone of their identity. And hope, nurtured by acts of kindness and courage, illuminated the path forward. Life, as unpredictable as it was beautiful, continued to unfold, one day, one moment, one heartbeat at a time. The years continued to pass, and Willow Creek grew into a town defined not by its tragedies but by its resilience. The scars of the past remained, etched into the memories of those who had lived through them, yet they no longer overshadowed the present. For Daniel Harper, life took on a rhythm of purpose and growth. He had come to understand that while some wounds never fully healed, they could be transformed, reshaped into something meaningful. His work with the Carla Dixon Scholarship Fund became his anchor, grounding him in a mission larger than himself. Each scholarship awarded was a testament to the power of redemption and renewal, a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was room for hope. Daniel's relationship with his mother, Margaret, evolved further as time went on. Though she remained in prison, their bond deepened through letters and occasional visits. Margaret's transformation within the correctional facility was undeniable. She had become a mentor to fellow inmates, teaching literacy classes and leading workshops on conflict resolution. Her efforts earned her recognition from prison officials who praised her dedication to rehabilitation. In one letter, Margaret wrote to Daniel about how helping others had given her a sense of purpose she had never known before. "I used to think my life ended when I made those choices," she confessed. "But now, I see that every day is an opportunity to make amends, not just for what I've done, but for who I want to be." Reading her words, Daniel felt a flicker of pride, though it was still tempered by lingering doubts. Could he ever fully trust her again? Perhaps not. But he realized that forgiveness wasn't always about forgetting. Sometimes it was about choosing to move forward despite the pain. Detective Laura Bennett retired after decades of service, leaving behind a legacy of integrity and compassion. Her final case, the investigation into Margaret Harper and Carla Dixon, had left an indelible mark on her career and her outlook on life. In retirement, she devoted herself to mentoring young detectives, sharing her experiences and insights to help them navigate the complexities of human nature. She often returned to Willow Creek, attending community events and checking in on old friends. One evening, over coffee with Daniel, she reflected on how much the town had changed since the trial. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "this place reminds me of why I became a detective in the first place. It's not just about solving crimes, it's about finding truth and justice, even when it's messy and complicated." Willow Creek itself thrived, its people united by shared values of kindness, accountability, and perseverance. The annual Carla Dixon Day celebration continued to grow, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and cities. What began as a tribute to Carla's memory had blossomed into a beacon of hope, inspiring countless individuals to pursue their dreams and overcome adversity. Young women supported by the Scholarship Fund returned to speak at the event, sharing stories of how Carla's legacy had shaped their lives. Their speeches were filled with gratitude and determination, echoing the spirit of renewal that permeated the town. For Daniel, standing among the crowd each year, these moments reaffirmed his belief in the possibility of healing, even after unimaginable pain. Victor Langston, once a towering figure in Willow Creek, faded completely into obscurity. His estate fell into disrepair, a stark contrast to the vibrancy of the surrounding community. Some whispered that he spent his days alone, consumed by regret and isolation. Others speculated that he might have sought redemption in private, writing letters or making anonymous donations to charitable causes. Regardless of his fate, his story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked ambition and cruelty could unravel lives, leaving behind a trail of destruction. For many residents, Victor's downfall underscored the importance of humility and empathy, qualities that had become hallmarks of the town's rebirth. As Daniel entered middle age, he found solace in the simple joys of life. He adopted a dog, a scrappy mutt named Max, whose boundless energy brought laughter and companionship into his home. Together, they explored the countryside surrounding Willow Creek, hiking trails and discovering hidden corners of the landscape. These quiet moments allowed Daniel to reflect on how far he had come. He thought often about Carla, imagining the kind of woman she might have been had her life not been cut tragically short. In his mind, she was strong and compassionate, someone who would have embraced the changes in Willow Creek with open arms. Remembering her kept him grounded, reminding him to live with intention and purpose. Margaret's eventual release from prison marked another turning point in Daniel's life. By then, she was an elderly woman, frail but resolute, determined to spend her remaining years making amends. With Daniel's support, she moved to a small apartment in Cedarville, close enough to visit but far enough to maintain boundaries. Their relationship remained complex, a delicate balance of love, guilt, and cautious optimism. Margaret immersed herself in volunteer work, joining local charities and participating in community outreach programs. Watching her rebuild her life gave Daniel a measure of peace, though he knew their journey toward reconciliation would never truly end. In the twilight of her life, Margaret penned a memoir, chronicling her mistakes and the lessons she had learned along the way. Titled Beneath the Surface, the book became a bestseller, resonating with readers who saw themselves in her struggles. In interviews, Margaret spoke candidly about her regrets and hopes for the future, urging others to confront their own truths with courage and honesty. Daniel attended several of these events, sitting quietly in the audience as his mother addressed crowds with grace and vulnerability. Though he still grappled with conflicting emotions, he couldn't deny the impact she had made, not just on him but on countless others seeking redemption. As the decades rolled on, Willow Creek continued to thrive, its people united by a shared commitment to growth and compassion. New generations inherited the town's legacy, carrying forward the values that had sustained it through difficult times. Stories of Margaret Harper, Carla Dixon, and Victor Langston were passed down, serving as reminders of the fragility of human lives and the enduring power of resilience. For Daniel, these tales were more than history. They were threads woven into the fabric of his identity, shaping the person he had become. On a crisp autumn morning, decades after digging up his mother's grave, Daniel stood once again at Carla's gravesite. The cemetery was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Placing a bouquet of wildflowers atop the marker, he knelt and traced the engraved letters of her name. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice steady and sincere. "For everything." Rising to his feet, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly with each exhale. Life, he realized, was a mosaic of moments, some painful, some beautiful, all interconnected in ways that defied explanation. As he walked away, Max trotting happily at his side, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, as it always had been, but he faced it with hope, knowing that even in darkness light could be found. And so, Willow Creek carried on, its people forever changed by the trials they had endured and the triumphs they had achieved together.